Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Today we continue to construct our clone about vegetation versus the undead. Now last time we added a few plants to our clone, specifically the snow pea and the kernel pot. While we managed to implement the snow pea pretty well, the kernel pot was a different story. A story we continue today. And the plan is pretty simple really. Figure out the butter situation. Sounds good, so let's get to it. Now first things first, we have to go back to the last time we worked on this project. Now I hypothesized that instead of trying to do the math in order to create an arc for our butter projectile, we could simply create the illusion of an arc. By splitting the butter behavior into two parts, we could have the butter fly upwards in the first half and simply mirror that behavior in the second half as it falls. The logic seems sound, yet despite my efforts, it turned out to be a failure. However, I maintain that it is a legitimate method, and so I decided to stick with the idea for this session. So we basically had to start from scratch. This time I decided to take it slow and started by trying to code a simple wave effect. All I needed to do was define a vertical speed, provide a timer, and have that speed invert when the time is up. Pair this with some horizontal movement and we had ourselves a wave effect. Perfect, exactly what I wanted. Now that our wave effect worked, all we had to do was properly time our quote-unquote wave to only occur once, and thus we would have our arc. So all we had to do was to divide the distance our projectile had to travel by its horizontal speed. But before we could truly see this in action, we had to figure out our destination. I carried over the code from our old attempt because, well, it's probably the only bit that actually worked. And it worked here too, kind of. Yeah, so this took a while to figure out, but long story short, it turns out that checking for a proper distance relative to the kernel pot somehow resulted in a number much larger than I anticipated. And so as a result, the answer to my issue was to basically find the mean of the kernel pot and the projectile's destination, which is odd because that mean ends up being the actual destination of the projectile. Look, I don't know, man, it worked, which is the important thing. So finally, after hours and hours of tinkering over several sessions, we had our arc. It wasn't the most elegant of arcs, but it was an arc. And I know it's not the most impressive of feats, but it's moments like this when you know something can be done and you manage to actually do it after so much effort. It's gotta be one of my favorite parts of doing this. But anyway, we weren't done yet. Though we had our arc, we had to add some finesse to it. We needed the butter angle to match the trajectory of the arc. This went through several iterations, but the gist of it was simple. Based on whether it was on the rise or fall, the butter would have different points it would rotate to face. And using our slow turning code that we've used in the past, we could ease that turn to make it more organic. Now, I'm almost positive that with proper math I could have managed something more proper, but after the battles I've gone through to just get this far, I was satisfied with what we ended up with. So now that our butter shots worked, we have to make them interact with the zombies properly. Setting up the same Y check we used for the lawnmowers, this would guarantee that the butter would only hurt the zombies in the same lane as the kernel pot that it came from. I then gave the butter a stick variable because in Plants vs Zombies, any zombie hit with butter has it stuck to their head. In retrospect, all I had to do here was cease butter movement, but instead I overthought things and made sure the butter only stuck to the zombie it touched, which stops moving at that time anyway. So thus I spent a bunch of time coding something that I'm not realizing I didn't have to code. Anyway, it ended up working, so I moved on. Now the kernel pot doesn't just launch butter, it also launches kernels. They're also fired in an arc, but instead of stunning the zombies, they just do damage. And so I had to take everything I just coded for the butter and shove it into a switch setup. I then added a type variable and added the kernel to the plant list. Again, in retrospect, I could have coded this better, but instead I simply copied the arc code from the butter to the kernel and left it at that. Then in the zombie code, I made sure to only stun if the arc projectile was, of course, butter. And finally, we were finished with the kernel pot. It might be a little hard to tell right now, but both Butter and Colonel now fly in proper arcs, and Butter now sticks to zombies, stunning them in the process, much like Plants vs. Zombies. Man, who would have thought that so much time and effort would need to go into something seemingly so simple, right? Anyway, this ended up taking way longer than I anticipated, and thus I decided to end the session while I was ahead, which sadly means the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So remember that if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. And as always, be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.